Thank you for joining us today for our session, Wellbeing Governors 2022. We're pleased to have so many of you already here. While we're waiting for more to join, I'll cover some housekeeping points. The session is being recorded and we'll share any handouts, slides and a link after the event. The event is CPD accredited, so if you'd like a certificate, please give your consent to share your data in the survey that will pop up as you leave the session. If you have any questions for our speakers, and we hope you do, please post them into the Q&A function and we'll endeavour to get to as many of them as possible. If we don't get to them all, we will endeavour to send responses after the event. Finally, we'd like to thank IET for sponsoring this event. We're delighted to have the support of the Institute of Engineering and Technology for the 2 days. So the numbers are still going up. I'll just give it a couple more seconds and then we'll make a start. So, hello and a very warm welcome to all of you to our conference, and this is the first session of the 2 days. We're delighted to have so many of you here and looking forward to this first session on Wellbeing Governors 2022. As many of you know, in the academic year 2020-2021, we ran our campaign Wellbeing Governors. Our aim for that campaign was to put staff and pupil wellbeing at the heart of boards, for them to create a linked wellbeing governor role, and of course to encourage more people and new people to sign up to take on the challenge of becoming a school governor and strengthen the skills and experience on school boards. Over the last 3 months, we've revisited our work in this area. The Wellbeing Governor pages of resources on our website remain amongst the most visited, and we absolutely want wellbeing to remain at the heart of boards' decisions on an ongoing basis. It's not just a COVID issue after all. Today, I'm delighted to welcome back some of those who supported our campaign from the start. Today we've got joining us Emma Hawker, who is the Projects and Impacts Manager at Governors for Schools. Emma was key to planning our original campaign. She's authored the report that we're sharing today. It accompanies this session, and today she'll be talking about our findings with you. Andy Mellor is National Director of Wellbeing at the Schools Advisory Service, and he has over 30 years experience in education. Andy was a head teacher and helped launch and run the Blackpool Teaching School Alliance. He was also the National President of the NAHC. Thirdly, we have Faye McGuinness, who is responsible for the development of education, sports, services and programmes. Faye joined the organisation and prior to that she was head of workplace wellbeing programmes at mental health charity Mind. She helped to develop campaigns and programmes relating to mental health in universities through COVID-19 and improving wellbeing in the workplace. I'm going to hand over first of all to Emma.
Thank you, Hannah, and hello everyone. So as Hannah mentioned, Governors for Schools have produced a new report which gives governors some insights into the pressures that school leaders are facing and the steps that you can take as a board to help improve the wellbeing offering for senior staff in your schools. Next slide, please. We've designed the report so it's easy to navigate. On the screen, you can see the front cover, and each of those headings is a link that you can click on to navigate straight to that section. Next slide, please. The section with our findings gives a bit of an overview of some of the key statistical headlines that we want boards to be aware of. I think it is important for governors to have a sense of wider national trends because it can be helpful to know what other boards are doing, and it's also a good way to consider how your board relates to these figures. Governor Hub, whom we know many of you use and whom we work with closely, surveyed just over 4,000 governors and trustees and found that 58% of them are tracking the wellbeing of their school leaders more closely now than they were before the pandemic began. I'd urge you to reflect on what you're doing about tracking levels. Perhaps your board is following a similar trend and closely monitoring school leader wellbeing. If not, why not? Has a conscious decision been made involving the appropriate people that this isn't needed? We're not saying that you should do something just because everyone else is, but you should be talking about wellbeing so that you know when you need to take action. Wellbeing shouldn't be left out of conversations and be absent from the agenda purely because it might be seen as less tangible than something like pupil results or school policies. It's not a case of it's none of my business, because there are things that boards can do to support the wellbeing of school leaders and other members of the school community. Next slide, please. This leads us nicely onto the second section, what the experts are saying. We've had input from several fantastic organisations that support schools and school leaders, and this section gives some context into the pressures that school leaders are facing and the impact that this is having on their physical and mental health. Again, not every situation in every school is going to be like this, but it's worth considering how much your board really understands what your school leader is dealing with. Has anyone on the board conversation with the head about their well-being, for example? Has anyone made sure that the head has somewhere they can go to get support when they need it, if they don't feel comfortable having those conversations with governors? The report draws out highlights from our conversations with these professionals, but their full statements are available by following links that you'll find in the reports. Next slide, please. The third section, what other boards are doing, highlights the importance of this last point about senior leaders seeking help when it's needed. We've spoken to several chairs who are all thoroughly invested in supporting the well-being of their school leaders. They each give examples of things they've done that support staff well-being, and a common theme is readiness to listen to school leaders and to show them that they're valued in the school. Through the course of our research, we heard a lot about heads who feel as though it's their job to look after the well-being of everyone else in school, but who's looking after them? Nurturing a relationship between school leaders and boards is a really important part of well-being, because if you can help to develop an environment in which school leaders feel that they can be open and honest about their well-being and what they need, you're far more likely to be able to address any issues earlier on. We don't want to overwhelm everyone. Governor wellbeing is important too, of course. So we'll be staggering the release of those wellbeing governor stories in full throughout the next term, and I'd urge everyone to read them. If you follow us on social media, you'll get updates about when they get added to our website. Next slide, please. So this section on what you can do is just that. It's a practical guide that talks you through some ways you can ensure the board are supporting the wellbeing of school leaders. As we've said, we're not saying that you have to do every single one of the things that we've suggested. You know your school and your board best, so we hope that you can draw some inspiration from these and reflect on what would work best for you, for your school leader and your setting. And if it gets the discussion around wellbeing going, then you're heading in the right direction. The mission element of our report confirms our commitment to finding the best volunteers who will champion wellbeing in schools, and will help them become effective through a range of training and development materials. Hannah did mention those at the start of the session. Next slide, please. So there are lots of materials for governors on wellbeing, of course, and this includes the resources on our website, as we've just said, and this report as well. We've highlighted some very useful and insightful materials that you can access throughout the report. We've given different references, and we've also included an additional reading and research section, which has useful kind of signposts to other things as well that you might benefit from looking at. Remember, you are the experts in your school, so that we hope you can draw some inspiration from our report and these governor stories that we've talked about to see if there's anything that you can do that would help improve wellbeing in your setting. Next slide, please. So please do remember to download this report after the session. You can find it on the Wellbeing Governors section of our website. You can see that highlighted on the screen now. And you'll also be able to find the first of those governor stories there as well. Please do keep listening, because we've got some fantastic insights from Andy and Faye coming up. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoy reading the report, and I'll hand back over to Hannah now.
Thank you, Emma, for providing the overview there. As I said, please do go onto our website and download the report if you haven't already. I'm now going to hand straight over to Andy, who's going to share his insights.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. It's a really important conversation that we're having, and as Hannah said, it's not just for COVID. We know that well-being of staff and particular senior leaders in school is high up on the list of concerns for governors. So hopefully I can give you a few pointers, and also maybe give you some ways to sort of develop the conversation moving forward, because I am conscious that we've got a short amount of time this morning, and there's a whole load of resource that we have to share. Literally, I've done in the last 2 or 3 weeks 4 whole school inset sessions that have taken all morning in terms of unpacking some of this. So it is going to be a real taster of what's available. But do please get in contact if any of this really interests you moving forward. I wonder if we could have the first slide, please. Okay, just while that's coming up, just to say a little bit about who I am. I know Hannah mentioned that I was a head teacher. I was head teacher at Blackpool St Nicholas C of E Primary School for 17 years. And I got to the stage with my school where doing everything that I was told to do had got us into RI. So we needed to do something that was going to really lift the performance of staff and students in school. And we decided to embark on a wellbeing focused approach. If I say it was a wellbeing focused approach, it sounds like I should be taking credit for that. But actually, we just did what was right for our children and for our staff. And by doing that, we got them in a really good place. We improved their well-being, and what we now know through the research is that if you do that as a school, you can have an uplift of up to 20% in terms of the performance of staff and pupils. And when you look at that as an ex-year 6 teacher trying to make an extra 2 or 3% on the SATs, how we would have benefited from having that 20% uplift. But that's available if you take this approach. And I am going to start with my first slide, which is unashamedly a definition of well-being, because I really think that we need to have a common understanding of what well-being is. It's a word that's used so freely and frequently that quite often it can mean different things to different people. So it is the state of being well, and in a school setting, I think it's a state of mental and physical health where an individual can thrive and flourish. And that's what we need to be aiming for our senior leaders and our staff in school, so that they can become the best version of themselves, both personally and professionally. And I think in the past, we've looked at personal well-being. I don't think you can separate the personal and the professional well-being, the occupational well-being, because I think if things aren't right at work, then that is likely to have an impact on your personal well-being and vice versa. So I would encourage you to have that conversation as a governing board. What do we think well-being is at this school? Have we got an agreed definition that the whole of the community puts its store by and understands well-being to be? And if we haven't, then maybe that's the starting point that we need to be looking at. Okay, on to the next slide, please. And this is why well-being is so important, because we want the staff and pupils to be the best version of themselves. We want them to thrive, because we know that if that's the case, they're more likely to produce better results, both academically, but just in some of the softer measures as well, in terms of higher quality relationships in school as well. But what we do know is that having that approach can uplift standards by up to 20%. And that's not just me saying that, that's actually research evidence where that's been, it was a study of over 7,000 students. So we know that's on offer. And I think sometimes it's not necessarily a question of staff thinking that they have to work harder, and particularly school leaders. I'm using this phrase working fresher rather than working harder. I think we have to give ourselves the time to freshen up as school leaders to be the best version of ourselves. So it's whatever we can do, I guess, as a governing board to help our senior leaders and our staff to be as fresh as possible, so that when they do come into school and work with the learners, they're the best version of themselves. We also know, and this is obviously a biggie at the moment, in terms of teacher retention, people will stay in post if they feel there's a wellbeing focused approach that cares about them as human beings. And I think that's really key, that that's articulated quite clearly. Usually, if that's working, you can sense it's almost in the DNA of the school. It's in the relationships. It's in the way that people interact with each other in school. So that's a useful byproduct of a well-being focused school. I think in terms of disadvantage, we worked with a large number of disadvantaged learners, and in every sense, in every group, we managed to close the gap between disadvantaged learners and their peers. And again, if you would like some more information on how we did that, I've got a whole presentation on the sort of strategies that we used to be able to do that. But all of this needs to be led from the top. It needs to be led by governors and senior leaders. In fact, one of the things I've been doing over the summer is creating a senior leader school thriving program, which essentially has a toolkit of all sorts of presentations, audits, and resources that come through a policy for our client schools at SAS. And we're working with schools on that program now. So if you are in SAS school, then we can have a conversation about that. And if you're not, maybe we have a conversation about getting you access to that. But I think the thing to remember is the single biggest indicator of happiness in adulthood is happiness in childhood. And I think if we were to have that conversation with parents, and we were to say to parents, what is it that you want from your school for your child? I think they'd say they want them to be happy. And I think that's really important. But all of that starts with our senior leaders in schools. So it's really important that they're in a good place too. Okay, next slide, please. And I've sort of started terming the sort of termly effect on mental health and well-being of senior leaders, particularly, as the termly roller coaster, because we come into school usually at the beginning of September when the children are back, with lots of enthusiasm for the year. Stress levels are fairly low. We're just keen to do a really good job and make this a really good year. And I think as we work our way through the term, there are all sorts of pressures which are articulated there on the left. And you'll be familiar with some of these as well, in terms of the impact of reduced funding and what that means for senior leaders in terms of trying to meet their obligations in school. Some of the issues around Ofsted and being in the Ofsted window add to that stress. And the implications of a poor Ofsted inspection as well can be really, really stressful. But the other thing that I wanted to flag up as well is a sort of self-inflicted pressure that senior leaders put on themselves. They're so keen to do a really good job for their learners and for their school and for their governors and their community that they end up putting themselves under incredible pressure. And sometimes it's about trying to protect them from themselves, because they have such high expectations, that it's about, you know, working and doing that last piece of work, when actually if we get to 11 o'clock at night and we're still working, maybe it's about turning in and just being fresh for tomorrow, rather than pushing yourselves through midnight and beyond to get that final piece of work done. And to be honest with you, I was 33 years in education, and when I left, I still left work on my desk. The job is never done. So I think we need to be really quite judicious about when it is that we say it's time to stop. Okay, next slide, please. So these are some of the implications of prolonged stress. And what we know is that over a long period of time, cortisol was designed to help us get away from predators. But we know when we're under prolonged stress, and senior leaders in school are under prolonged stress, that prolonged exposure to cortisol can have some significant impacts on our physical health and our mental health. But some of the things here are on physical health. And as you can see, a lot of those conditions you'll be quite familiar with. And I've worked with groups of head teachers, and large numbers of them had some form of heart disease. And I don't think we're really understanding the issues around the impact of cortisol and prolonged exposure to cortisol on heart health. So it's really important that we try and dial down on that cortisol. The way we do that is trying to get sleep and opportunities for relaxation. So those two things are really important, but they're in short supply for senior leaders who are constantly asking so much of themselves. So in the short term, we know that all of this can have significant impact on the health of senior leaders. We've got data at SAS to suggest that when the senior leader in school is off, staff absence increases by up to 60% as well. So it's really important that we get this right and that we look after the health and well-being of our senior leaders. Long term, we know that access to cortisol, prolonged exposure to cortisol over the long term can have an impact on the health of the senior leader, not just when they're in post, but actually beyond that and into retirement as well. And we need to be thinking about not writing checks on our bodies that come home to roost when we retire as well. So it's important that we look after all of this. And I'm whizzing through it because I'm conscious we've only got a short amount of time. But if this is of interest to you and you like to explore this a little bit more, then please do get in touch. Okay, next slide, please. And the reason why we do the job is because we want our learners to be in a really good place to learn. It's how we're judged in terms of our effectiveness, and this drives an awful lot of the stress, I guess, in terms of the lives of school leaders. We want our children fit and healthy and in a good place mentally to learn. We know that poor mental health and well-being is a barrier to learning. It's just like a special educational need. And without removing that barrier to learning, it's very difficult to realise a child's potential. And that's accentuated when you're working with children in deprived communities, in disadvantaged communities, where quite often stress levels in the pupils themselves prevent them from being able to access learning. Even the best quality first teaching won't have the sort of impact unless we start addressing some of the well-being of pupils. And the reason why I mention pupil well-being is that for me, all of this hangs together with the strategic lead, and that's where it starts with governance, the strategic leadership of well-being across the school, making sure that our school leaders are in a good place. And if we can do that, and we have a program called the Be Well, Lead Well program, which we can use with senior leaders to show them what their well-being looks like at the moment, because we know that if they're in a good place and they understand their well-being, they're in a better place to support staff. And if staff understand their well-being, they're in a better place to be able to support the well-being of pupils as well. So for me, it's all linked, but it starts with senior leaders. And prior to that, it has to be wrapped in the collective support of the governing board. Okay, last slide, I think. So there are some things to think about here, and I wanted to sort of summarize the whole of the presentation really in one slide. And I guess if you take away anything from this presentation, it's having a clear and shared understanding of what well-being is at our school. We know that for individual members of staff and for individual school leaders, well-being is unique. There are different things that trigger poor well-being. There are things that support well-being that are different for individuals within school. And it's making sure that we understand, A, what well-being is, and then moving on to having a really clear audit and review of the issues around well-being that pertain to different senior leaders, different staff, different students, different groups of staff. What might work in terms of well-being for teachers won't necessarily work for the site supervisor. So it's having audits in place that actually cover the support and the uniqueness of well-being for different groups of staff as well. I think having governor oversight and scrutiny of the impact of well-being on standards, I think is really key. So making sure that it's on the governing board agenda at every meeting, making sure that there's a conversation taking place about where we are, what sort of strategic plan do we have for well-being. And again, you know, you don't need to start from scratch with a blank sheet of paper. I've got lots of resource that helps you to set up a strategic plan for the school. And then I guess in terms of resourcing it and having courage for the journey, there will be people. I bumped into one in the gym the other night who wanted to know why young people were such snowflakes. You know, where do you start with a conversation like that? It's really, really difficult, but it's about having courage to not only stick to your guns in terms of what you believe about well-being and having people in the best place to be the best version of themselves, but also to encourage them to work fresher and not harder, and knowing when to stop. And when we're all about productivity and all about results and outcomes, there is this, there can be this suggestion that we get better by working harder. And I'm not sure that people in school, particularly school leaders, can work any harder than they are at the moment. So I think the value in terms of the well-being of individual senior leaders and the effectiveness of the school now lies within working fresher and making sure that they're in a good place to work when they come into school. And that's about giving them time to be able to dial down on that cortisol, have the opportunities to rest and relax and get a good night's sleep, and then they can be the best version of themselves when they come into school. The last slide, I think this is just my detail. So if any of that is of interest to you, anything that I've talked about, if you're interested in looking at a strategic plan for your school, if you are already an SAS absence insurance school, then I can have a conversation with you as early as later this week, really to start building this up and setting up a strategic plan, making sure that you have things in place to be able to support your senior leaders. And if you're not, then I guess in many ways what I'm hoping, and Governors for Schools have provided this sort of platform, is to try and get the message out to as many people as possible that wellbeing is so important, not just for individual physical and mental health, but if we are really serious about taking our schools onto the next level, then for me, this is the approach that we need to be taking in all of our schools. And I stand ready to support and help any schools that are interested in taking on that journey. Okay, Hannah, I don't know whether you're going to go straight to Faye or whether it's going to be questions.
We do have one question come through from Mikey. How do you get the, I guess, all the staff, senior leadership team, MDSAs, teachers, teaching assistants, admin to share a unique wellbeing goal? So how do you bring everybody together? Is there a good tip that you can share there?
I think all of this has to be premised on culturally understanding what well-being is in your school. I think once everybody understands what well-being is, then they can apply that definition to themselves in their situation. I don't think that it's necessarily right that we end up with one well-being goal for all staff. I know, and apologies to anybody who is really into yoga, but if you ask me to go to a yoga session as part of collective approach in school, or school bought in yoga, that wouldn't do a huge amount for my well-being. But if you gave me the opportunity for 4 or 5 hours in the garden on a Friday, on a Sunday afternoon, rather than sitting catching up on schoolwork, then that would. So I think it's about making sure that we understand that well-being is so unique and individual, that we have an audit that understands the staff that we work with, what makes them tick. And I think the one thing I think that would be a unique goal that I would say, just to leave you with, is to ask yourself as a governing board, how do we tie in all of our staff, whatever role they have in school, into the fabric of the school? What makes it unique for somebody to work as a site supervisor or a business manager in your school that's different in a school compared to working in an office block? Because that's about sense of purpose. And if we can develop that sense of purpose and fulfillment, working towards a greater goal, the achievement of the children, the development of young people, then actually there's an awful lot of fulfillment that staff will get through that. So think about how we tie people into the purpose of the school and the mission of the school, regardless of what role they have, because that's good for their well-being.
Lovely, thank you ever so much. I've got lots of a couple of comments about slides. Slides will be shared at the end, and we towards the end of the week, and we will also share links to all of Andy's resources and so on and so forth. So all of that will be shared with you. I've got lots of questions coming in now. One more question before we move on to Faye, and then if we have time, we'll get to any more at the end. Where does one start with wellbeing? So a new governor learning the ropes, where do you start? Is it that audit, or is there something else that you would start, given all of the priorities that schools have at the moment, as always?
I'm currently reading a book at the moment by Andy Hargreaves, who's a well-known educational writer and speaker, called Wellbeing in Schools. And it's a really useful sort of historical perspective of where wellbeing has come from, and where we are now and why we've arrived in that position. So that's a good book for a bit of background reading. I think what it needs is a conversation with the staff in school who are possibly part of a wellbeing team, because quite often schools will have a wellbeing team, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. My starting point would always be with understanding what wellbeing is in the context of your school. What do we all agree that wellbeing is? And I think that conversation needs to be had right across the school community. Part of this pack I've developed is a set of slides for parents, so that parents understand that wellbeing isn't something that's soft and fluffy. You know, surely you want the staff in this school to be in the best place possible for your children, so that your child gets the very best deal. And I think it's getting those messages across, but having that open conversation right across the community as to what well-being is, and dispelling some of the myths around what well-being is, I think is a useful starting point. Beyond that, it is, you know, the classic audit, plan, do, review. You know, and I think, you know, that's a useful place to start. But I would also be mindful that not everybody's wellbeing triggers and wellbeing preferences are the same. And I think, you know, bearing in mind that, and the fact that people in school who do different roles need to be tied into what I call autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So how do we give people autonomy in their roles in school to be able to contribute to the school? We know that autonomy is really important in wellbeing. How do we develop people's mastery and the skills to do an even better job? And how do we develop that sense of purpose in those roles, particularly those roles that are not children facing? How do we tie them into the mission? So there's a lot there, but as I say, this is such a huge topic. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation sort of one-to-one and pick some of this up later.
Thanks ever so much, Andy. We do have more questions, but I'm going to move on to Faye now, and if we can get to some at the end, we will do. So Faye, I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation now.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I'd like to say so good to see so many of you, but I can't see you all, but I can see the numbers, which is fantastic. So we can go to the first slide, thank you. So just quickly, who we are Education Support. If you don't know us, we are the only UK charity dedicated to supporting the mental health and wellbeing of everybody that works in education. And fundamentally, we believe that better wellbeing leads to better education. So I've got 20 minutes with you today, and when I was thinking about what can I deliver in 20 minutes, because as Andy said, we could talk about this stuff for weeks on end. But what I was really thinking about is, you all know probably better than I do about the current issues facing the workforce in your schools. You all know the issues that might be driving good or poor mental health. You understand what's currently going on. And also you'll understand some of the actions that you need to take. So when you read the Governors for Schools report, which is absolutely brilliant, it gives some great recommendations, and it talks about the actions that you as governors can take to support staff mental health and wellbeing. So we know that there are many actions that we can take. But actually what I wanted to go back to is, how do we change beliefs to drive that action? Next slide. Thank you. And you can click until the 3 buckets come up. Thank you. So what we're asking for you to do, what we're asking schools to do, whether that's you're a governor or you're a school leader or whether you're a staff member, we're talking here about taking action to drive better mental health and wellbeing. But to take action, what we need to do is we need to change behaviour. But to change behaviour, we fundamentally have to change people's beliefs. We need people in schools, whether you're a teaching assistant, whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a school leader, whether you're a governor. We need to fundamentally believe that staff mental health and wellbeing needs to be at the heart of the school environment. And if we can change people's beliefs, we can drive better behaviour. And if we can drive better behaviour, we can start to take action that really changes the ethos of staff mental health and wellbeing in a school. So for my 20 minutes today, what I want to really look at is what do you need to do to start to change that belief so that you can drive behaviour and you can drive action. Next slide, please. So we truly believe that if you're going to change the belief within a school, then you have to look at how you build psychological capital. And psychological capital are the things that individuals need to feel psychologically safe in school. And so we talk a lot about health and safety. You know, we've spoken about health and safety for many years. But in reality, what we've really focused on is the safety part of health and safety. We've not given much attention to the health part of health and safety. And in reality, we haven't given much attention to the mental health part of the health and safety. And so psychological safety is really thinking about if you were in a school and there was a hole in the floor and one of the staff members walked along the corridor and fell through that hole and broke their leg, you can be pretty sure that very quickly that hole would get covered up because you wouldn't want anybody else falling down that hole and you wouldn't want the same person to fall down that hole twice. But when it comes to psychological safety, when it comes to our mental health, we're not as good at covering those holes. We're not as good as making sure that people don't continue to fall down those holes. So what we really need to do at the very core is to think about how do we create psychologically safe work environments for school staff and how we build psychological capital so that individuals can start to believe that well-being is important so that they can change their behaviour and they can take action. Now, I could probably spend half a day talking about each of these on their own, but we've only got 20 minutes, so I just want to pick up a couple of these. So all of these are elements that drive psychological capital and build psychologically safe work environments. So they're all really important. And so whether you are a governor, whether you're a school leader, or whether you're somebody that works in a school, it's really important for you to think about how you are cultivating these in the environment. So the first one that I wanted to touch on, and as I say, we can't cover all of them, but the first one I wanted to touch on is connection. Connection is an absolutely core driver of good mental health and well-being. And building connection between staff, between governors and leaders, between governors and the rest of the school community is really fundamental if we want people to feel well at work. And we know that much of that connection was lost during the pandemic, and really trying to build that up again needs to be a key focus for schools. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to touch on a model that was developed by Brene Brown. If you haven't heard of Brene Brown, she's a very well-known professor. She focuses on building connection, shame and empathy. And she's got some amazing books, which I would highly recommend you read if you're really interested in this kind of stuff. And she talks about the 3 pillars of building connection. Now, whether you're thinking about building connection within your governor's board, whether you're thinking about building a connection with your school leader, or whether you're thinking about building connection across the school staff community, these 3 pillars are really, really important. So the first pillar for building connection is around developing grounded confidence. And this really is about building an environment that is all about learning and improving. And the near enemy of learning and improving is knowing and proving. So it's not about creating an environment where you are knowing and proving. It's about cultivating an environment on your governor's board with your school leader about how you can learn and how you can improve. So, and that's the same for the staff environment. So how are you cultivating grounded confidence so that staff feel like they're continuing to learn and improve? The second pillar that she talks around about building connection is about practicing the courage to walk alongside each other. So this is really about how does everybody play a leadership role when it comes to mental health and well-being, where you're not pushing from the front, or you're not pulling from the front, and you're not pushing from behind, but you're learning to walk alongside each other. And the near enemy of that is controlling the path. And we all have that in us, right? Because we're all busy, you've all got lots to do. And in some elements of your work, you do need to take control of the path, and you do need to make decisions, and you do need to drive the direction of the school. But this is really getting into the grips of how do we walk alongside each other, and how do we all take a leadership role when it comes to supporting our own and our colleagues' mental health and well-being. And the third pillar that she talks about when it comes to connection is how do we support story stewardship? So how do we create the space where people can be open and talk about their experiences, their struggles, their stresses, their mental health and well-being? So how do we make sure that at every level in the organisation, people have that space that they can bring the well-being into the everyday and have those conversations? And this is really built on the premise that actually we can never know truly how somebody is thinking or feeling, because the research shows that too many emotions and experiences present themselves in the same way. And even if some emotions have the same reactions, every individual will react in a different way. So as a governor or a leader, how are you creating space for conversations about mental health and well-being? And how are you helping people to share their story? And she talks about the enemies of story stewardship as being narrative tap out and narrative takeover. And how many of us have been really busy and we've got lots to do, and somebody comes to talk to us about something they're experiencing, or they need 5 minutes with us. And we might say, do you know what, I've just got something I need to do, can you come back a bit later? Or we might say, oh, actually, yeah, I've been through that, I understand that. That's narrative tap out and that's narrative takeover. This is about how do you create the space to be with people and to listen to the issues and the problems that they are facing, so that they have the space to have that conversation. And if you can't have it in the moment, how do you create space later to have that conversation? So Brene talks about these 3 pillars of connections, and they feel like they really resonate in schools. So thinking about how you can develop grounded confidence, practice the courage to walk alongside each other, and to support story stewardship. So connection is really important. Another area that comes up a lot is around appreciation, and appreciation being more than just a thank you. So we publish every year our Teacher Wellbeing Index, and we look at the state of the nation when it comes to staff mental health and wellbeing. And one of the key things that came out of our findings last year was around appreciation. So school staff are feeling appreciated actually by their colleagues and the wider school community, but not feeling so appreciated by the general public, the media, by our government. And that really trickles down in terms of how people feel about their purpose and their connection and the work that they're doing. So there's a really fundamental thing here about if you want to build psychological safety within the school environment, then you need to show appreciation. And as sort of governors and as school leaders, some of the things that we've heard from school staff about how you can do that is about, you know, recognising the small things that are done that sit outside of the everyday job role. Saying thank you, recognising, naming those things. Appreciation is shown by having honest conversations, giving honest feedback in a timely manner. So we've heard from people that there's been some relationship breakdowns because actually people are struggling to have those open and honest conversations about what they're thinking or feeling or some of the tensions. So creating a space where actually you can have those honest conversations. And there's a really great model of giving feedback called Radical Candor. If nobody's heard of that, you can Google it, but it's a really great model for how you can give feedback. Appreciation is about actually working together to understand, as Andy said, what is the common goal for the school in terms of well-being? Starting small, what is it that you're looking to achieve? What is the difference you want to see? We can all do lots of things, take lots of actions to change or to better mental health and well-being in schools. But actually, if we're not seeing what the result of that is, if we don't know what it is that we're working towards, then actually people very much lose their sense of direction and lose hope in the sense that actually this is something that is important. So what is your shared goal around well-being? But then actually, what are you doing at an individual level to recognise the individual needs of everybody in your school? Mind, the mental health charity, produce a really brilliant thing called a Wellbeing Action Plan. And we're seeing many organisations in other sectors rolling this out across the board. So as part of staff inductions, they're introducing the Wellbeing Action Plan, where every individual formulates their own action plan about what keeps them well, what are some of the things that might cause them to feel stressed, what might they want to do what they might want their line manager to do if they are feeling stressed, how they might want to be approached, what are some of their wellbeing non-negotiables that they want to share. So it's a really great way to kind of show your staff that you appreciate them, because from the moment they join, you're talking about their mental health and well-being. So appreciation is a really key area. And then the other one I wanted to touch on is around hope. I think it's fair to say that, you know, over the past couple of years, it's been really difficult to kind of keep our eye on having hope. You know, it's been a scary and worrying time for people. But we know from the research, we know from the literature that having hope is a really, really key aspect of having good psychological capital and feeling that our mental health and well-being is important. And hope can feel quite fluffy. It can feel like this thing over there. And when things are really tough and there's lots happening to us, how can we keep that hope? But what hope theory talks about is the fact that we need to be having conversations with our teams, with our staff, around what their biggest fears are and what their biggest hopes are. So what I'd recommend you doing if you're a governor or you're a leader is having the conversation. So if you're a governor, having the conversation with your leader, your school leader, what is your biggest hope when it comes to your mental health and well-being and the staff's mental health and well-being over the next academic year? But also, what is your biggest fear? And let's talk about it, let's name it. And then what hope theory talks about is actually then setting some goals around that biggest hope. So actually, okay, this is your biggest hope around yours and your staff's mental health and well-being. What are the actions that you can take to move towards that biggest hope? How can we action that so that hope doesn't feel like this big fluffy thing at the end, but we can start to see progress against that biggest hope and start to alleviate that fear? So, you know, all of these are really important. And as I say, there's lots more that I can say about each 6 of these areas. And I'm more than happy to come and talk to schools about this in more detail. But fundamentally, if we want to change people's behaviours and we want people to take action, we need to start building psychological capital in schools. And these are the areas that you need to focus on to do that. Next slide, please. Sorry, just back one. And back, yeah, this one. So what is really important for us to really identify, and at education support we talk about a lot, is that wellbeing happens at 3 levels. So you would have seen on the previous slide that one of the areas was resilience. And actually resilience can resonate with some people, but for some people as individuals, they find it very difficult, because we can't talk about individual resilience without recognizing that wellbeing happens at 3 levels. So when we're talking about education, we know that wellbeing happens at an individual level. So as individuals, we all have a responsibility to think about our own mental health and wellbeing and the things that we need to put in place to keep ourselves well. It's also the responsibility of a school leader or a governing board to think about what support you have in place for individuals wherever they are on the spectrum of mental health and wellbeing. So individual level is really important. But we have to recognise that individuals work within a workplace, and your school will have its own culture, it will have its own policies, procedures. There will be conditions in your school that are creating the environment for those individuals who will either be thriving or will be struggling. So we have to focus on the workplace piece to think about how we create psychologically safe workplaces. But we also have to recognise that within education, you work within a wider system. And that system is making policies, that system is making decisions. Sometimes it feels like that system might be doing to you rather than with you. And we know that that has an impact on the school environment, which then has an impact on the individual. But we fundamentally believe that you can make the biggest difference at that workplace level, because systems take years to change. You all know that better than we do. They take years to change. And individuals are very complex. And as an individual in an environment, it's very hard sometimes to think about what you can do for yourself. But if we can get this workplace bit right, if we can really focus on the conditions and the cultures that are driving good or poor mental health, and we can get those right, we can really make a difference to the education workforce when it comes to mental health and wellbeing. Next slide. Thank you. So just to finish this section, another wonderful writer called Glennon Doyle often says that the hardest part is between the knowing and the doing. So to my opening point, we know what we need to be doing. We know that there's lots of actions that we can be taking, lots of recommendations. But actually the doing part is the really difficult part. And there's lots of reasons for that. We know time, workload, priorities, not quite knowing where to start. Wellbeing feeling like it's a really big thing and actually not thinking about the small steps that we can take. But if you're a governor or you're a leader, there's a really important role for you to play between bridging the knowing and the doing. And hopefully, in terms of what I've spoken about today, that is about setting the culture and the conditions to change the belief within the school and to create that environment. So I'm just going to finish by sharing some of the stuff that we can do to help. So next slide. We love this quote. You know, self-care can sometimes get a bad reputation, right? You can think about it as sort of fluffy and, you know, as Andy said, yoga and meditation, and there are things that really make people roll their eyes, and we get that. But actually, it's about thinking about self-care as not that fluffy add-on. Self-care is a fundamental part of the work. So this quote really sums that up, that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. We need to see well-being as part of the work, not an add-on to the work. Next slide, please. So from us, Education Support has a 24-hour confidential helpline, and it's manned by qualified counsellors, and we'll offer immediate confidential support, and that's for anybody working in education. So if you haven't already got that poster in the staff room or in the toilets, it's a really simple thing, but as you can imagine, we're seeing increasing numbers of people calling our helpline, and it is that in the moment support for people that might be struggling, who might not be ready to talk internally. You know, if your school leader is struggling, they might not quite be able to feel like they can talk to you yet. So providing them that confidential space outside of the organisation is really important. So please do promote the helpline and make sure that everybody in your schools knows about it. Next slide, please. We're also funded by the Department for Education and Welsh Government to deliver fully funded mental health and wellbeing support for school leaders. So this is for head teachers, deputy heads and assistant heads. If you're a governor on here or you're a school leader and you're not accessing this or you're not promoting this to your leaders, please do so. So what we're offering is we're offering free access to peer support. So we're bringing school leaders together in groups of 7 in facilitated sessions over a period of 6 months, and we're only asking them to allocate 90 minutes a month. And as you can see from this quote, one school leader said it was completely life-changing. Each session enables such food for thought and tools for self-care. It's impossible to say how grateful I am. So we're bringing school leaders together and creating them a space where they can talk about the issues they're facing, but really focus on the impact on their mental health and wellbeing and the actions that they can take. Alongside that, we're also offering one-to-one professional supervision. So this is a space where if a school leader feels that they want that more one-to-one support, they can access 6 sessions of free one-to-one professional supervision with a qualified supervisor and create the space to talk about how their work is impacting on them personally and the impact that has on them as a professional. We're seeing more and more leaders accessing professional support. And just to say again, this is fully funded. So please do be recommending your school leaders attend this support, and you can see the website where they can sign up here. Next slide, please. And lastly, just to say, if you haven't already visited our website, we've got a huge number of free resources, free tools on there for you. So things like example audit templates, wellbeing plan templates, how you create psychologically safe school resources, lots of stuff on there at an organisational level and lots of stuff on there on an individual level. There is tons of stuff. It's all free to access, so you don't have to start from scratch. We think it's really important for us as an organisation to give you as many of the tools that we possibly can to help you on this journey of supporting staff mental health and wellbeing. Next slide, please. So so here's my details. If anybody wants to reach out to me, you can contact me on LinkedIn, you can contact us at Education Support. We are here to support you. We are here to kind of listen to what your unique needs are and to give you the help and support to really drive mental health and wellbeing at your school. And I think lastly, I just wanted to finish by saying thank you. I spoke a lot about appreciation, but it's about appreciating you and the work that you're doing, whether you're a governor, whether you're a school leader, whether you are working in a school, you continue to change lives and you continue to matter. So please do remember that staff mental health has to be at the heart of the conversation that we're having around education, mental health and wellbeing. Thank you, Emma. I think that's me done. I think we've got 5 minutes for some questions.
Thanks ever so much, Faye. We have indeed. That's brilliant. I do have a question for you. As you've said, good individual wellbeing is driven by different factors for leaders and pupils. With this in mind, what are your thoughts on how best to track positive movement? So how can we see that it's working, I guess? Is it looking at pupil happiness or is it something else?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that you need to look at. So if you're specifically looking at staff mental health and wellbeing, and we hear this a lot, we kind of talk to schools who say, oh, we're doing all of this stuff and it's like brilliant. And what's the impact of that? And what's the difference that's making? And it's like, we're not quite sure. So I think there is the piece that Andy spoke about at the beginning. So carrying out a staff survey or an audit to currently see how your staff are feeling. And as much as I'm a fan of your yearly staff surveys, absolutely, I think they're really important. They are a moment in time. And I know that if I complete a yearly staff survey on a Monday after a really great weekend, I'm probably going to feel a lot better than if I do it on that Friday when I've had a really full-on hectic week. So yes, do your yearly staff survey, look at where your baseline is, and then set yourself some measures. Where do we want to get to? What do we want to look like next year? And let's be realistic and recognise all of the factors that might impact that. But what I'd also recommend that you do at the very least is do some quarterly pulse checks. So not just leaving it a whole year, but actually what are the pulse check moments that you can check that you're on track? You can check actually, are there things that were outside of our control that we didn't quite recognise, and do we need to maybe alter where we're looking to get to? So having those opportunities for regular sort of spot checks and audit checks is really important. I think one of the key things is to think about how you're communicating with your staff about the progress that you're making. Because actually, if you don't communicate about it, nobody knows that progress is being made. So that communication is really important. There is evidence out there that talks about the impact of staff mental health and wellbeing and the impact on pupil learning, pupil attainment. There's not enough research that's out there, but there is some research that's out there. So again, you might want to kind of look at, okay, well, what are some of the measures that we can think about in terms of linking those two things? So one of the questions that we ask in our school leader evaluation that we ask is, at the beginning, we ask about the school leader's sense of purpose as a leader in education. And we also ask them about how their wellbeing impacts on their relationship with their staff, with pupils, and with parents. And then we ask at the end of that support where they sit. And what we're seeing is after the 6 sessions, people's sense of connection is much higher. And we're seeing that their sense of their well-being and the impact on their relationships being much better. So there are some things that you can do to look at that kind of relationship between the two. But you have to start with a baseline, otherwise you never know where you want to get.
Thanks ever so much, Faye. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We've had lots of questions, and what we'll do is we'll collate them and share that document with all of the Q&A that's been going on in the background. We've been seeing Andy and Emma frantically typing in the background to answer your questions. Please do download our report. It's available on the website, as Emma said. We hope you'll find it useful. This session is PD accredited, so if you would like the certificate, you need to complete the survey as you leave, and then we'll have your details to send it to you. Finally, a huge thank you to everything you all do as governors. We've had lots of comments in the Q&A about governor wellbeing, and we know that while the governor role is both enjoyable and rewarding, it can also be very challenging. It's one you volunteer for and give your time freely to do, so safeguarding your own wellbeing is really key to being able to do that role well. The only thing I would say is share the workload. You've got a board with you. Speak to other people on your board about how you can ensure that the role is manageable. Thank you for everything that you do. We hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. It's been a pleasure to have you today. Goodbye.